Welcome! A couple of weeks ago I did a video with how I do all kinds of textures, like this one with a roller texture, and this one that was scratched, and this one, one of my favorites, with the Steve Tool, very dramatic. And as I promised you, I would return when it was bisque-fired and how I apply the glazes. So that's what we're going to do today. What all these textured pots have in common when it comes to glazing is that the goal, at least for me, is to emphasize the texture. You want it to stand out as much as possible. And there are basically two ways, at least two ways that I work with to do that. One is very simple. It's to use a glaze that breaks off a lot. When we talk about breaking a glaze, it's the mystery of glazes changing colors dramatically whenever they glide off or pool into areas of a pot. And with textures, of course, the glaze, when it melts, will pool up in the lower parts and glide off in the higher parts. So you want a glaze that changes color when it does that. And luckily enough, a lot of my stoneware glazes does exactly that. So some of them I'm just going to do with a glaze, and then it will magically happen by itself. The other way of doing it is rubbing in a wash, and that's especially good on, let me just take this one. It's especially good when you have these ones I made with sodium silicate, where you have all these little cracks, and it can be difficult for glazes to pool in there, so it won't, depending on the glaze again, change much over this sort of texture. But if you take a wash, it could be, in this case, depending on the glaze, it could be a black stain, or it could be a cobalt wash or copper wash, or whatever you like that goes well with the glaze. First you apply it, and then you wash it off on the surface. So only the wash, only the colorant will be left in the little cracks in this pot. And then you can give it whatever glaze you like, and that will then make all these little cracks stick out more. Again, you need to have a wash that is sort of a contrast to your glaze. The first one I'm going to do, this one, sort of have this Japanese sort of style to it, Asian at least. And for that, I will use a glaze that will naturally break off very beautiful. And that's a Temmoku Gold. It's a very high iron glaze that breaks beautiful. It's on some areas it will be completely black, and in some areas it will be yellow, and in between that the golden nuances and variations. It's a very, very beautiful glaze, one of my favorites, and I think it's going to work really well on this particular pot. The clay that I use for this particular pot is a nice clay to throw in. It's a stoneware with not too much grog. But you can maybe already see it now, and it gets even worse after the glaze fire. The color of the pure glaze, or the color of the pure clay, is not that interesting. It's not white, it's not gray, it's nothing in between. It's just very dull. So, and I only want to glaze it down to about here. And as you may remember, I have sort of a glaze catcher here to make sure that the glaze doesn't run down on my kiln shelf. But then I'm left with this foot ring, and it's just a very dull color. So I'm actually going to use a wash, and you can apply a wash just very lightly and brush it off very lightly, and that's going to leave a different color than what your clay have. That's working great. So I'm going to start out with that. You can of course use any kind of wash that you want, depending on the glaze. You know, I have to match it somehow. I want a dark wash so the foot sort of disappear and the top of the bowl pot lights up. So I'm going to use this, I can't remember the name of it. I can look it up and add it somewhere here. It's a sort of Japanese style wash. It's a mix between cobalt, copper, I think some manganese maybe. I will show the recipe. And it gives a beautiful dark color. And I think that's going to match the Temmoku Gold very well. So I'm just going to add now some to the rim here. And I think I'm also going to add it on the inside. And since this is not a glaze, it's not going to melt out, so I'm not too afraid that some of it is actually on the bottom. I think I may wash it off a little bit, but it shouldn't glue to the kiln shelf. At least I don't hope so. I want to include the lower part because that's where the glaze is going to end. I don't want any empty parts. I would rather have a little bit of overlapping. I think that would work well. So that's it. Put this aside. And the same thing with this wash as with most washes, because the oxides and the carbonates and stuff we put in, it's very, very strong colorants, so they mess up a lot. So make sure that you clean everything good. And now I'm just gonna lightly brush it off, not completely. I'm gonna take most of it off at the very bottom. So just a very light layer. I'm gonna brush it a little bit. I don't want it to be too thick, but so now it's almost washed off there, but it's still gonna leave a little bit of a tint. And then I'm just gonna lightly brush this. And I don't mind. I actually want it to be a little uneven. And again, it's okay that it goes up on the edge just a little bit, because that's going to blend in with the glaze that we're going to use. So you see, it's not washed off, but it's just a little uneven, and I think that's going to work wonderful. I hope. Same thing in the bottom. This is going to give it like a nice glow, I hope. I could, of course, also have used this wash on the entire pot to sort of get into the grooves, but I think that's a little too white, and I think it will look nicer just with the glaze. But again, play around with it. It's like a canvas, and you have all these colors, and don't be afraid. This is another reason I hate test tiles, because this sort of thing, you just can't test with test tiles. So the next thing, I should have done in the beginning, was just to wash it off, so we don't have any dust or particles or anything, because that will could make the glaze not stick and doesn't look so good. So now it's clean and ready to glaze. I also want to make sure that there's no crumbs or anything inside. Not that anyone would see it, but still. And now I'm just going to pour in the glaze in the inside first. Pour it around, turn it out, and that's the easy part. So I'm not too worried about drips here, because I'm actually aiming for variation, so that's fine. Now comes the second part, which is always a challenge. The outside, do you want to dip it? Do you want to spray it? Do you want to pour it? In this case, because I have a good foot, I think I will dip it. But if I look at this bucket, I don't have enough glaze. There's glaze up to about here. And as you see, that's not quite enough. Even though it will expand when I put the pot down, I don't think it's enough. So what do? A very easy trick is to use a smaller pot, because a bucket, if you put it in a smaller, with a less diameter, this I could actually have used an even smaller one, but this one is perfect because, of course, it's going to fill up more and it's going to expand or push out the glaze a lot more in a small bucket. So, so I think if we pour it into this one, I think it will be good. I just have to watch out that I only pour it into the bucket. So, see, this bucket is almost full. So now I'll just dip it in, which is always a little bit tricky because you don't want to drop it in. I think it's going to be okay. So I'm going to push it up and see how much it pushes the glaze up. And I think this can get a good layer. Now my fingers are almost breaking. Oh, and I'm turning it around. And then I'll let it dry. And after it dries, I'll just make sure that the bottom is wiped off and fine. So that was one. These are the two fluted bowls that I made a couple of videos ago. I really like this sort of design. And remember, again, this is the same clay that I don't really like the color of. So one of them I added a slip to, so that should actually be a better color. It should be much darker, closer to black. This one I didn't do anything about. So for this one, I also want to apply the Japanese wash to it. And I think actually for this one, I'm going to give it the Temmoku Gold as well. So let me start out with the slip. Wow, it's running. The wash, not the slip, the wash is almost like water. So be very careful. You don't actually need that much. It's a very strong colorant. And just be careful because it's going to run all over. So, and now, I mean, it dries almost instantly. So right away we can start wiping it off. And again, I'm going to wipe off most of the foot, but still leave a little bit of it. So we'll just help get rid of that awful dull color of the clay. And then on the sides here, I'm just gonna brush it off sporadically like this, just to get sort of like an uneven feel to it. I think that's gonna be nice, and the same thing on the inside. So see something like that? I deliberately don't want it to be even. I just want it to be a nice break from that dull clay color. So, now we have it. And again, I'm just gonna clean the table a little bit because otherwise we're gonna get the washes all over everything. And we really don't want that. So now we're ready to glaze it. And again, first I'm gonna put it in. That's easy enough. Put it around a little bit. So, and again, I'm not too afraid of the runny. I don't want it to run down into the lower part of it, but other than that, a little bit of different thickness is actually good. Now I will just dip it into the bucket upside down. And for this, I only want to go to about where the fluting ends. So, that's it. For this vase that I used scratch texture on, I want to do it also in an easy way, just to show you how different it can actually turn out without having to do too much. So I'm going to use another one of my favorite glazes, Folk Art Gilt White, I think it's called. It is theoretically a white glaze, white gold white, but have a lot of rutile in it, and therefore it creates these beautiful breaks with a reddish sort of color, iron oxide color. Again, this is my boring color clay, so and I won't glaze further down than here, so I will add a wash on this. But unlike the other washes, I will use a red iron oxide wash for this, because it works really well together with the Folk Art Gilt White, because it is based on red iron oxide. So I have some of that here, red iron oxide wash. And just remember, as I said, it's very fluid, it's very colorful. If you get anything on you, or yeah, I got something here, I'm gonna take it off right away because it smudges everything, and yeah, it's just very, very colorful. Anyway, I do have a video about how I make these washes, because it's not just oxided water. I also add some other things, but you can check that video out. I'll put a link somewhere. So again, I'm going to do the bottom first. And again, it doesn't matter if it runs a little bit into the texture, because the glaze is also iron oxide based, and yeah, it will look nice. I could add red iron oxide into these grooves, but for this particular glaze, I don't need it. So again, I'm going to clean the bottom, not completely, but enough to kind of make a difference. Also because some of these oxides, if they're too thick, they tend to be just black, and we don't want it black, we just want it darkish, reddish. I'm going to tone it into the side just a little bit. That way it won't be as sudden, I hope. So, something like that. Or exactly like that. And again, keep the table clean. Look at this mess. I don't know if I'm particularly messy, but it always ends up all around there. Anyway, it can be cleaned, and it will be. Well, so. And here's the bucket of folk art. Yeah, you can hardly see it, but it's there. And first, I'm going to glaze the inside, as I usually do. Just going to add couple of these into it. And swirl it around a little bit. And again, I'm not too concerned with all the leftovers here. Maybe I'll take just a little bit of the worst parts away. But I mean, I like the variation of the glaze. That's what creates the interesting part of it. So now I'll just let it dry for a couple of seconds. Gives me time to clean the table again. It's easier to do it as you go. And I think, you know, if you look at this bucket, there's glaze up to here. But then when you push down the pot, it's going to take the space and make the glaze move up. So I think we're good now. Yeah. One thing is to push it down, but to hold it in that position is really, really difficult. So I took it up, and I think it looks good. So I'll just let it dry, and I can clean up my table, and then I will clean the bottom. Now it's dry enough to touch, and it looks good. It actually doesn't need that much cleaning down here, but just want to go over it so we don't get runny glazes at the foot. And just by doing this should be enough. It was actually pretty well dipped. Very good job, Mikkel. So I think this is good. And in a couple of days, you'll see the result. The other of the fluted bowls, I'm also gonna just give a single layer of glaze. I'm not gonna glaze the lower part. I'm gonna glaze the inside and the fluted part with another one of my favorite glazes, Temmoku Gold, because that gives such a nice variation of colors. So I'm gonna try with that. And as usual, I'm gonna do the inside first. Maybe a little bit more. Like that. I'm gonna swirl it around. This glaze can take quite a thick layer. It just changes color from black to yellow to gold. It's a very interesting glaze. So I'm just gonna swirl it around a little bit and empty it like that. And I'm not going to do anything about the sides because I like the variation. So I'm going to let it just dry a little bit before I dip it, and that's it. It's really quickly. I think it's dry enough now. And then we're just going to dip it down to this part. Now I already smudged it here. That's what I said about this iron oxide hell. It looks good. I think that's good. And I think there's a few places here where I don't want this clay to stick out on its own. So yeah, I think that's better. And also I don't want the glaze to run down. You can see it ran down there a little bit, so that's easy enough. Just remove that. So this is ready to fire. Next up is something a little more advanced and somehow challenging because I have this bowl that I use sodium silicate to create this this texture, and there's a lot of these little bit crackles, and as we discussed, it's very difficult to get any glaze to float into to textures that are this tiny. So instead, but I still want to highlight these textures as much as I can, like the other pots. So what I'm going to do for this is to use a technique where I apply a very watery wash or a stain that will then go into these textures. Then I'm going to wipe it off. It's going to stay in there. So next I'll apply a glaze that is a little bit translucent, so it will shine through. So let's get on with that. In this case, I'll be using a black stain. You could also be using a copper stain or any other stain, but I want to create as much contrast as possible for this pot. Before you start applying it, make sure that it's well mixed. You don't want any lumps in it or anything. So yeah, and it is almost like water, which is a challenge. I'll show you. Because it is so watery, it is very likely to run. So, and I don't want it to run here. I don't want it to run too much here. I'll probably apply a wash on the bottom. I don't want the glaze there. But once it soaks into the clay. So if you get something here, it's almost impossible to get away again. So let's try and see if I'm good enough, lucky enough to be able to apply it nice to the edge. And you see, it's, I don't know if you see, but it runs into the little cracks, and that's exactly what we want. It's a little bit difficult when I when I have to hold it in an angle where you can see it too. I'm sort of handicapping myself, but and don't be too nervous about how equal you apply it. The only purpose in this stage is to get it into the cracks. So apply as much as you dare. Again, you don't want it to run, so trying to do it the best I can. So that was the upper part, and now the lower part. I like to do the edges first, and then I can fill out the rest. Now it's all over the pot. I just want to go over it and make sure that there's a few white spots here. Just want to make sure that I got enough stain in it, and just check that it's actually floating into all the little textures, all the cracks. It's better to put too much on now than too little. Sorry, my microphone suddenly ran out of battery, so I think you got most of it. I just cleaned the table to get ready for the next stage, and the pot is now completely, all the cracks are soaked into this stain. So now it's time to wash it off, because we only want it in the cracks. And in the same way that when you apply the stain, you have to be very careful only to wash it off where it actually is and not smudge it all over your pot. Unless that's what you want. I'm using a sponge, a wet sponge, but not too wet, because if it's very wet, it's gonna run. So just gently rubbing it off. You'll see in a second the result here, or at least how it looks before we glaze it and fire it. And you need to constantly dip it, because yeah, you're rubbing off black stain. So now you see, it's almost getting off the surface and just leaving the stain in the cracks. I'll still need to wash it a little bit more, but I think you get the point. It does take a little bit of work. I usually just go over it sort of quickly to get most of the stains off, and then I go back and clean it even more, because at the first stage your sponge is going to get dark and soak up all this this surface stain, and so you need to dip it all the time, and then the second time you go around it's going to be a lot less to remove, so you have to take it in stages, or at least that's what I do. It will sooner or later destroy your sponge, because it is like a grinder now, the surface, and it does tend to wear out your sponges. But just use cheap sponges for this. It's fine. See, it's getting better and better. Now you almost see the picture here. Very little stains left on the surface. Most of it is now in the cracks. And again, don't use too much water, because if you use too much water, you're gonna, the water is gonna run into the cracks and take out the stain that you just applied there. You don't want that. And you can see now I'm almost not getting any stains on my sponge, and that's a good sign that we are almost done. So I think I'll just smudge it a little bit here. Yeah, that's better. I think this is good. It looks like it's almost just in the cracks now. Of course, it will be a little bit on the surface, but this is very little. It's going to be covered by my glaze. As I mentioned before, this is a clay that is very good to throw in, but the color of the raw clay is, well, to say the least, not very interesting. But glazes look really good on the clay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a stain and color the foot, so it will be darker. And I think I will use this wash that is a mix between cobalt and copper and a few other things. I can put the recipe down here. It's a Japanese style wash, and it turns almost black. And I think that will give a nice contrast to this pot. So so the lower part will just sort of disappear, and the upper part will shine. This is also very watery, and I definitely don't want that to run into my beautiful textured stains down here. So I'll see if I can be careful. Just gonna paint the inside of the foot. I'm gonna wash off most of where the pot sits. So the very I'll call this part. But this is keep in mind, it's not a glaze, so it's not going to melt out. So even if there's a little bit left, it won't glue to your shells. So I think that's good. Just want to check some of the edges here, that they're sharp and good. I think that looks good. And now just want to remove some of this on the bottom of the foot. So I think this is good enough. And keep your hands, table clean, because otherwise it's going to smudge out all over your pots. And I don't want that. Look, I actually got it a little bit inside here, but you can still, you know, wash it off, but it's better not to get it there, because it sort of soaks into the clay. So I can remove most of it, and then I can, you know, smudge it out, so at least it doesn't leave very distinct marks. This is a good time, of course, to also clean the inside, so there's no dust or particles or anything, so the glaze will stick. So now it's ready to glaze. For this one, I'm going to use as a glaze over top of the stains we just did, this glaze called Lynette's Opal. It's a very beautiful, very subtle whitish glaze with a hint of blue, if it's thin enough. But it also is a little bit transparent, so I hope I can see the black stain through it. I haven't used this combination before, so as usual, I'm just gonna try it out and see how it goes. First, I'm gonna glaze the inside, and that's easy enough because I'm just gonna pour it in, swirl it around, and pour it out really quickly. And of course, I mix the glaze very good before I do this. And just want to shake it, make sure I don't leave any marks that are too big. So that looks good. The outside is a lot more tricky because, as it's always the case when you have wider pots like this, they don't usually fit into a bucket. See this one? Yeah, it doesn't fit at all. So I have to either spray it, which would probably be ideal, but I don't want to set up the spraying booth and all that stuff just for this pot. So I'm thinking of just pouring it over the outside. It is not as precise, but I think that's what we have to do with this one. So I'm going to see if I can do this precisely enough. Probably going to be a few places I need to, repair, digging a little bit. I think it went okay. It's not perfect, but it's close enough. I think I need to just repair a little bit on some of the edges here. I think that's actually turning out pretty well. Yeah, this looks good. I think this looks good. So I will just make sure that the bottom is still clean and just try and do the edges as sharp as possible. Yeah, this way. I think I need to just repair a little bit with my wash. Now I have to be really, really careful because I don't want this to smudge into the glaze. So yeah, look, I think this looks good. I can see there's a small spot somewhere here. Ah, yeah, that's my maker's mark. It's sticking out, which is fine. So that's it. Now we'll turn it around and see. There's probably a few spots inside that I need to repair with my finger, just dipping it. I'll check that in a second. Yeah, as you can probably see, there's a few spots in here where I put my fingers and a little bit on the edge where the glaze is sort of missing a little bit. And a good way to add that is to just dip the glaze, the finger in the glaze and dip it on. Because if you brush it on, it's going to be too thin usually. So just by tapping it like this, you get a layer that looks a little more like what you poured on. And in this glaze, it doesn't matter if it's not completely even, because it does leave some variations. So it's okay, I hope. Yeah. Now I don't think there's any unglazed areas. I will let it dry, and then there's a few drips around that I will sort of just smudge out a little bit to make sure that there's no layers that are too thick. So that's it for now. The last thing I have to do is to just make sure that there's no areas where the glaze kind of ran and there's a little, drip or something. And I can either scrape it off with this rib, or I can just smudge it out with my finger. So let's do that. You see here where I dipped it with my finger, there's a little bit too much, so I'm just gonna slightly scrape some of that off. And just pull it out and just gently smudge it with my finger. When you do that, you scrape off some of the glaze in where it's too thick, and you kind of move it to areas where there's less. So it usually works really well with this finger technique. I'm not so afraid on the very top here because that's gonna run off anyway. And it's more on the sides of the pot here, on the inside. The next one I want to do is this one, same sort of clay, but this is the one where I cut out the sides before I expanded it. It became a beautiful bowl, and deliberately I also made the inside. I don't know how you can see it here, but there's some trimming ripples or something in here, and the glaze can also shape some nice forms there. I will give this another one of my favorites, the Folk Art Gilt White. It turns white if it's too thick, but you can get these beautiful variations of this reddish, rusty kind of color, where it breaks off the edges. There's an option to do this the very easy way, and just basically dip it in the folk art. But in this case, I want to emphasize the structures with a little bit of red iron oxide wash. As I demonstrated in some of my other videos, washes can be applied both under a glaze and over a glaze. In this case, I'm just going to do it under the glaze. And first, and also another thing I forgot to mention is it's always sort of tricky. Do you apply the washes like in areas where you only want the wash before you glaze or after you glaze? If you do it before you glaze, there's a risk that you smudge it all over the pot and get it into the glaze areas. If you do it after, there's a risk that you scrape off the glaze, just as we did with the last pot. So, there's good and bad things about it both ways. Anyway, I think I'm just going to do basically the sides here. And I'm going to use this fan brush. A fan brush is a wonderful thing because it makes these stripes. So I'm just going to mix up my red iron oxide wash. And like the other washes, it's super fluid. So I'm going to use this to highlight the patterns we have here. Just like this. This should also be emphasized with the glaze, but now I'm just going to do it even more. So this will help emphasize. Also, I'm going to give it a light, a swirly kind of brush inside that I use a lot on my pots. Something like this. Yeah, just like that. As usual, first I'm going to put it on the inside. I'm trying to keep it there as short as possible because I want some of the brown or reddish colors to appear. So I think this is good. Now the tricky part is I don't have that much to hold on to. A bigger foot would have been nice, but I don't know if I can make it this way. Or if it's too risky. I think I can. It's going to be a really quick dip. I did it! I will need to wash the foot a little bit, but I did it. And it's going to be a little bit on this. That was sort of easy. I just need to clean my hands because this glaze is, as you can probably see, full of red iron oxide, and that is very colorful, to say the least. So I'm just going to put it down here and just let it dry for a few moments. So now it dried enough for me to touch it. So just want to make sure that we don't have glaze running down on the foot, at least not too much. So I'm just going to clean that. So, and as I explained, the same thing applies with this pot. It's made with this glaze that, or this clay that I really like working in, but it's not a very beautiful color in itself. And as I'm not going to have glaze at the bottom, I'm going to apply this wash. Just a very light. And this is going to give it a nice rusty color, and it's going to sort of match the color spectrum of the glaze, because this is a red iron oxide wash. So it's the same colorant that is essentially used in the glaze. So that's it. And I'll just wash off the very bottom of it. So now this is ready to be fired as well. This one is basically going to get the same treatment, but I will have to do it in a little bit of a different way. I will start out with the red iron oxide wash underneath it. And again, I'm using my fan brush, but I'm applying it in a little bit of a different way. So something like this should be good. Now, I think you can see that. Just a little bit on the top here. Yeah, I think this is going to be good. And again, I will start by giving it some glaze on the inside. And with this one, I'm not so afraid if I smudge the oxides out a little bit, because it's just an underlayer, under glaze, under wash. I don't know what the right name for that is, but it's it doesn't matter so much for this one. Now I need to let it dry just a little bit, but as you see, this pot is too big for my glaze bucket. I don't have enough. So how do you fix that? What I'm going to do in this case is that I'm going to, because I can't hold on to the foot anyway, so I'm going to hold on here. I can hold on here, And then I'm just going to dip the top down to about where the texture starts. And then I'm going to turn it around and dip it. And of course, that's going to give me a lot of glaze at the bottom, but that will be very easy to remove because it's basically just the bottom of the foot that I need to remove. And a little bit, make it thinner on the edge here. So let's start with the top. Just going to give it a very light dip, because remember with this glaze, I think I told you, if you apply too much, it will just be completely white, and if you apply very little, you will get this beautiful rusty red color. So I hope this is good. Now it needs to dry a little bit because I need to hold on here. I could, of course, you know, smudge off some of the glaze, but that's very easy to repair. And this one is so well formulated, it dries in, yeah, a matter of seconds. You can almost see it drying. So that old joke about watching paint dry is actually really quickly with this one. So now it's dry enough to dip, and again, that's going to be a really quick dip because I don't want to apply too thick of a layer. Then I'm just going to remove the glaze from the bottom of the foot. So wish me good luck. I'm going to try and remove it right away, at least most of it. So now I've got most of it away. I'm just going to let it sit and dry for just a little bit. And now here to remove the rest of the glaze here. I really don't want any glaze on that outside of the foot. It's okay if there's some left, but just not like a real thick layer of glaze. And of course, I really don't want anything on the bottom of the foot, because then it's going to glue to my kiln shelves. But it's okay to have glaze on the inside of the foot because this is not running, so it's sort of safe. That's of course something you need to know about your glazes. Are they running? Are they not? And as I mentioned before, even a glaze that's not normally running, when you have all these textures, it tends to pool up in the deeper areas and float off in the higher areas, so it will usually run a little bit more than if you use it on a smooth surface. So now I think this is ready to fire as well. This is, without a doubt, the most challenging texture of all, because I haven't done it before. But it's also a very beautiful texture. And so I'm gonna go sort of a safe way with this, because I'm gonna use my floating blue that I love so much and that always produce good results for me. The problem with this is that I can't hold on to the foot. There's no foot, outside foot. And ideally I would spray glaze it, but it's still early spring. So, and today it's sort of windy and I don't have a spray booth, so just do it outside. But I'm depending on sort of non-windy weather. So instead what I'm going to do is I'm going to dip it first one side, let it dry, and then the other side. And because of the floating blue can take so much glaze, the more the better. I'm not really afraid that there will be overlapping and it won't look good, because I'm pretty sure it will. So this is going to be what I do for this one. So and then on top of that, I'm going to do something. So it's not just going to be the floating blue, and I don't know how to brush this without completely destroying my sponge, but I'm just going to dip it to make sure that there's no dust sitting there. I think that's going to be okay. And then of course the inside. I mean, it's, you look at your pots and they're like, they look clean, but trust me, there's always a little bit of dust or particles or something, and if you don't clean them, it's more likely that the glaze won't stick. So now I'm going to try and dip this first one side. It's actually a little bit too small, but I think I think I can just dip the sides. That's not getting enough, so I'm getting as much as I can this way. Yeah, it looks okay. I'm just gonna wipe it off on the outside of the foot because I don't want the glaze there, because with all the texture, I mean, my floating blue variant is not super runny, but again, with all that texture, I just can't be sure. So I just want to make sure that at least I have some space for it to run. I will clean the rest of it before I put it out. So I'll just need to let it dry a little bit, and then I will dip the other side. While I let the first one dry, I will also do this one. This is also going to get the floating blue, but again, I'm going to do some things to it to enhance that nice blue, floating blue. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to add some extra oxides to it. And I'm going to add some of it under and some of it over. So I'm going to start out with a, just going to remove this bottle a little bit. I'm going to start out with a Cobalt Oxide. It's a copper oxide, a green oxide. Again, it's very watery. So I'm just going to add some splashes in here. So this time I'm not going to paint, I'm just going to splash it. Like this. The only thing about splashing is that it doesn't just splash on your pot. It sort of splashes all over the place. And I'm also going to add a little bit of the zinc, which has completely dried out. You can just add some more water. That's the beauty about washes, is that even if they completely dry out, it just turns back to powder, and just add some more water. And then it's a wash again. So I'm also going to do some splashes of that. So something like that to begin with. Because I'm going to do more than that, but let's get back to the glaze. First, again, gonna put it inside, and the floating blue, as I said many times before, can almost never be too thick applied. So I'm gonna take my time. I'm gonna pour in a lot of it here, and I'm gonna take my time moving it around. No rush. The thicker, the better. I don't think I ever applied floating blue too thick, but I definitely applied it too thin. If it's too thin, then it turns, well, almost black, but dark purple, brownish. Depends a little bit of what version of floating blue you use. There are many versions, many variations of floating blue. This one is very close to Old Forge version, where he changed the original red iron oxide with manganese, and that gives it a little more purplish color where it breaks. And I kind of like that better. I think the original one is too easily turning too brown. So this one works really well for me. So out we go. And then I'm going to do the outside. And there's not a very distinct foot, but I'm just going to put my fingers here, because I can always, add the glaze where my fingers are holding it. So that's going to be good. And this one is not too big for the bucket. So I'm going to dip it, I'm going to hold it there, take it up and down a little bit. I want to make sure that I apply a really good and thick layer to this. I'm actually going to just let it dry a little bit, and I'm going to double dip it in the top. Actually, it needs a little more in the bottom here. just gonna hold it here for a few seconds. Ta-dam, 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 dam, dam. It dries pretty quickly, even though it's a thick layer. You can see this other one we made first, it's almost dry. It's just, what is it, a couple minutes ago. So that's good. So, I think I'm just gonna put it aside and let it dry a little bit more. In the meanwhile, while this one is drying, I think we're ready to try and dip the other side of this one. And that's just going to be the last corner, so I think we'll get away with that. Just going to let it soak in here for a while. I want to make sure that it gets enough. And of course now I'm going to scrape off a little bit on the edges, but that's fine. I'll be able to apply that again. So there we go. And again, I got a little bit on the bottom here, so I want to remove that. It doesn't matter if it's completely clean because I'm going to apply some of the mixed wash here. I just want to make sure that there's absolutely no glaze on where it sits, so the very bottom of the foot, so it doesn't glue to my kiln shelves. And I can already see now there's a couple of spots where I didn't get enough, so I'm just going to apply that with my finger. And again, with this glaze, it doesn't matter if it's not completely even. It actually looks better almost if it's not. So I can easily go in and add a little more. And I think I'll actually take a brush and do that. To apply more of the floating blue to these pots, these Chinese brushes are very good because they can hold so much more glaze. So and in this case, we want the more we can get, the better. So just want to make sure that also in the overlapping here, just make sure that's not it's not too little. So that was the inside. I have to let it dry a little bit to do the outside. Now this is almost done, and this, of course, I didn't dip the entire body, so I can just easily remove whatever glaze came down here. This foot I don't need to give any wash because this is going to turn out a nice dark brownish color, so it looks good as it is. I'm going to do the same thing to the outside because I'm not sure it actually got enough, and I want to make sure that it got plenty. Just going to dip it like this. Or I don't know what you call it. It's not brushing because I'm not actually brushing. I'm just splashing it sort of on. But this has proven to me to work really well with this glaze. It only works with a glaze like this that can take almost any thickness. The thicker the better. For other glazes, they would crave and fall off or flake off and just wouldn't work. So I'm not suggesting you do this brutal way of glazing with anything but glazes can take it. This one can. And also the floating blue breaks so beautifully over edges. So I'm expecting that it will create some really strong textures on this dramatic surface. And now that I have it up this way, I just want to make sure that the foot is cleaned. I also want to add um, the Japanese wash at the bottom of this, because this is, as mentioned a few times now, the clay that I don't like the color so much. So by adding this wash, we can get an almost black bottom. So something like this. I'm just going to clean the very foot. So now the two bowls have dried a little bit, and I will of course not stop with that, because I'm going to add some of my favorite white glaze, like a star-like pattern in the middle of it. And you've probably seen me do this before. I've done it a lot and it works really well. And right when it's still wet, I'm going to sprinkle a little bit of this steel wool powder that I made some videos ago. You probably also see me do that. And I just need to sprinkle very, very little of that. And actually, I think I'm going to use my special tool for that. Do you know these ones? I think they're used to spread out the sugar on cakes or something, but it actually works really well for this as well. Just to spread out just a little bit like that. So I'm going to prepare that, have it ready. I'm going to clean my fingers. And of course, I don't have much left of this, but it doesn't matter, because I'm going to pour it in and spread it out with a brush anyway. And this part has to go a little bit fast because I'm working wet and wet. So I have everything prepared, and I'm going to pull up. Of course, I mixed the glaze. I'm going to pour it up in this, and I'm pouring it up because for this it's very important that there's nothing on the outside, because when I take it in over the pot, I don't want anything to drip down on the sides. I only want it to be right in the middle. And I have my brush ready to spread it out, because I'm doing this wet and wet, so to speak. I'm just going to pour in a little bit here. I'm just going to roll it around a little bit like that. And I'm going to spread it out into these star-like patterns. And in my experience, this gives some really good results. I think we need just a little bit more. I don't want to put in too much at a time, because I can't remove it again, of course. So yeah, this is better. So like this, and then very, very little of this. So see, like this, very, very little. And I'm going to let this dry. And I'm basically going to do the same on this one. And very, very little of this. Just like this. But we're not going to stop with that. We're going to do some more. Next thing, I'm going to add some oxides on top of the glaze. We'll put something under, now I'm going to put something on top of it. One of the oxides I'm going to use that we didn't use on the inside is, or below the glaze, is cobalt carbonate wash. Cobalt is a very strong colorant, blue. It's the same colorant that is in the floating blue, so it kind of plays well with that. Except adding more cobalt will make it more runny. So I'm only going to apply this on the inside. So I'm going to sort of highlight this star pattern that we already established here. Again, using my fan brush. Just something like that. that's going to be enough. And the same thing on the other one. So that's it. And then we're going to supplement with some copper carbonate, because that green and the bluish washes just work so well together. I know that by experience. So let's try this first. Oh, see, now I pushed off a little bit of the glaze here. So in the end, I will just go through it. I can see there's a little hole there, and it dip on a little bit of the floating blue glaze. So something like that. And the same thing with the other one. Except for this one, I'm also going to give it a little bit of the cobalt or copper carbonate on the outside. Not too much. Just something like that, just to give it a little bit of life. Back to the floating blue, because now I'm just going to do the final repair on this one, because I sort of destroyed it a little bit. So just going to dip some extra glaze here, and I think there was another place too here. Let me just see. Yeah, over here. Yeah. So the last thing I want to do with this is I want to add a little bit of Temmoku Gold on the rim, and that's because I know it's gonna make it a little bit darker, and it looks beautiful. So I don't want to add too much. Just something like that. It's okay if it runs a little bit, just not too much. Now I used 2 different glazes, 3 different oxides, actually 3 different glazes, because this is a 3rd glaze on the rim. I do this because I know that they work together. If you try to start out with this, your glazes are probably different than mine, and so they may not play together. Maybe they separate on the pot, maybe don't work with your clay. So there's no other way than testing this. These combinations, something that I tested, I know it works. So I'm ready to put this in the kiln too. Now the kiln is full, or there could have been a few more small things, but I don't have anything that is small enough. I do have some bigger things that also need glazing, but that's how it is. But I did manage to squeeze in a number of these mid-sized vases, 4 more plates, and yeah, I'm happy enough. So let's get it started. Now I finished all the textured pots glazing. And as usual, some of it turned out really nice and some of it not so much. I would say some of it even failed. But that's the consequence when you do experiments like I do all the time. Of course, I try to learn from the good things I do and repeat that on production. But I'm not afraid of failing. I'm not afraid of trying something new, because even though when you try something new, you often fail, something amazing now and then comes out of it. A good example is this design. This is one of the textured pots, the bowl that was cut, remember that, and expanded. And I think this came out so beautiful. I mean, it almost looks like organic, some tree or something. And the inside here, I love this. And this is actually something, this design I repeated a few times now. This is something, the combination of the two glazes, sometimes the third on the rim, and the oxides inside, and the steel wool powder, is something that I did through a number of experimentations. And now I found this way of doing it that works really well for me. So this one definitely was a success. But let's look a little bit on the dark side of what I also did, because I'm not one of those potters that only share a glamorous picture of all the perfect pots I'm doing, because I'm not, you know, and I want to share my failures with you as well. This one, remember this one where we rubbed in the black stain, actually in a way came out okay. I mean, the black stain comes out really well. The failure on this pot is the fact that I used a glaze I never used on top of this sort of stains enhanced texture. And apparently it didn't really like, it didn't play so well over it. So as you can see, there's some drips, it doesn't apply very evenly. And so this glaze apparently wasn't ideal for that. The main part of the experiment, highlighting textured, the sodium silicate texture did work. So all in all, I don't like this pot so much, but maybe I will reglaze it. Maybe it will become better. Maybe I'll just throw it out or give it to charity or something. The same thing could be said for this one with the most dramatic texture. I was actually expecting it to stand out more. The inside looks beautiful. It's the same design that I've used so many times. But there was a little bit of craving, and I just feel like it should have been even stronger. It's not bad, it's just not perfect. So let's move on to some of the pots that I really like. Because this one, although it was one of the most simple glazings, it was basically just dipped, first the top and then the bottom after I did the inside. Look at how this comes out. I mean, this is, in my mind, really, really beautiful. This is a perfect example of folk art white or gilt white where it's best, because it does have white most of the places where it's thick, but then when it breaks over the edges, it turns completely brown, reddish brown, and it does make the texture on this pot really, really stand out. So this is in my mind perfect. I love the way that this came out. On the other hand, I also did this bowl with the same glaze, a folk art gilt white. And as you see, the application was a little bit too thick. There is some coloring over the trimming lines inside, but not so much. And on the outside, even though I marked it up with a little more red iron oxide, I think it comes out a little too pale. I mean, this is not completely failed. It's just not as beautiful as I was hoping for. So this is definitely a pot that I would put aside for a reglaze day. So moving on to the first ones we did with the Temmoku Gold, which has only that glaze and nothing else. But take a look at this. I hope you can see how big a variation it is. It goes from completely black in some areas into this rusty brown in some areas, and then yellow goldish color in some areas. I mean, the range of color in this glaze, that's just one glaze. You know, remember that? Just dipped it in and that's it. Comes out so beautiful. I mean, it's a matter of taste. Some people don't like this glaze. I love it. It's the same thing on the bowls we made. And this one, remember, I put the slip, the colored slip at the bottom, so it's completely dark. And I think it comes out nice when you put it because it kind of disappears. I did similar thing just with a wash underneath here. And as you see, I washed it off unevenly, and I kind of like that. Some people would hate that and say, oh, that's a fail, it should be more even. If you want to make it more even, you can just do that. And again, you could refire just the foot if you wanted different. But I actually like these bowls. It's a very nice texture, and it works so well on a table with a little salad or some hummus or whatever you want to serve. I think they look beautiful. But again, it is sort of a very distinctive glaze, this Temmoku Gold. Always a matter of taste, but I do like it. So all in all, good things, bad things, but I am all in all happy because I learned something from my failures and I got something new out that I really love. Oh, I forgot to mention one pot, and that was the scratch texture pot that I also applied the Redart Clay white to. And I think it came out beautiful. The way that the red colors where the glaze breaks just highlights the texture in such a beautiful way. So this is another good example of how Redart Clay white, if it's applied right, can turn out really beautiful. However, with this pot, I had the same problem as I had with some of the other ones, that the top got a little bit too much glaze. So it just turned out plain white. And in contrast to this beautiful lower part, I just didn't like the look of the whole pot. But, as I mentioned before, you can reglaze, but you can also do something else. You can do luster glazing. And I've been using quite a few times gold luster. And I have a whole video coming up about how I use gold luster. But I decided for this pot to add gold luster in a third fire. Now I'm going to take off the paper and you'll see how that turned out. Oh, so now you can imagine how it looked when it was just pale white, but now it looks super exclusive. And I mean, it looks like gold because it is gold. It is 24 karat gold and it is super expensive, but you apply very, very little. So the total extra cost for this pot, well, is not too bad. Not considering the fact that it went from something sort of plain to something outstanding. In my mind, it's of course a matter of taste, but I think I like it. So I hope you enjoyed this rather long video, but glazing does take time, and I think maybe that's the most important thing to take out from this video. First of all, keep experimenting, because the combination of glazes and your clay and your fire schedule will produce different results than mine. Even if you take the exact same glazes and you put them on exactly like I do, and you fire them as close to what I do as you think you can, it won't be the same. So you have to make your own experiments. And the second thing is, don't be afraid. Try things out, go crazy. Of course, if you have something, a pot that is very dear to you and was very difficult to make, maybe you want to go with something you know works, like my combination here. That works for me. But for all the rest, make sure you can practice your throwing and then you can practice your glazing, and eventually you end up with something that is really interesting. And in my personal opinion, it's much more interesting to work this way and come up with something truly unique, because after all, that's what we do as ceramic artists or potters. Because if you just wanted something that was exactly the same all the time, I mean, you can go to IKEA and get that. People are looking for, and I'm looking for, something truly unique. And that's what you get by following this recipe. Anyway, that was a whole lot of talking. I hope you enjoyed it. And next Sunday, I will have another video about 5 o'clock Central European time, 5 p.m. On Sunday. And if you like this, I hope you will subscribe, show your support, share, comment, whatever you like to do. I really enjoy all the comments. Good ones, bad ones, good suggestions, great. I mean, we share. So I hope to see you soon again next week, and have a wonderful day.